Hi, everybody. I'm back. We're back. It's time for part two of answering the Edge questions. If you're new to this, don't start here. Start at the intro, or this could be very, very confusing. Even more so confusing than it already is. Anyway, a little bit of housekeeping. I haven't really looked at the first day's video of the questions, but from my memory, which is usually pretty good on things like this, I've answered these questions pretty fully and satisfactory, which I'm humbled and thankful to be able to do. So if that is the case, and again, I'm going on memory, but it felt good while I was doing it. If that is the case, one of the good things is now the brilliant researchers and scientists who are posing these questions, their time and their energies can now be devoted towards other things. So that is an absolutely wonderful thing, because we're talking about an incredible gaggle of human minds, and just what can they do now that they're freed from the shackles of these questions that I've been able to. I mean, I might have gotten a sign wrong, or absolute value versus relative value, or forgot logarithmic versus exponential, but I think pretty much it's, if my memory serves, stuff's locked down, and we can just get past those. So that means it's all the more important to get on and get through the rest of these. Two, prizes and accolades. I'm a simple man. I'm really, the work itself is enough. I've always liked the concept of knighthood. I'm not a British citizen. I don't know if I would want to be knighted in England. It's not quite the same. It would be nice if the American government could recognize the idea of the potentiality for knighthood. For just maybe just me. And I would like to be presented, greeted, introduced by David Hasselhoff. And I would like to drive away in kit. But that's not really, that's secondary. It might even be tertiary. Academy Awards, sure, but they've gone downhill, so it's not that big a deal. Nobel, of course not. That's, but if potentially there could be another category of class of prize that is, let's say parallel to the Nobel, we'll call it the Daniel Frum, and obviously I would be the first honoree, probably the only one ever, but we'll keep it open. You keep it open. All right, so going from there, I think methinks we left off here. Methinks we left off here. So this is what I'm going to look at. It's happening again. So let's see here. If this is the case. Oh, this is, I can even read this. This is Simon Baron-Cohen. He of Borat fame, or perhaps not. Who's to know? Professor of Developmental Psychopathology. Ooh. University of Cambridge. Phenomenal hockey team. Fellow at Trinity College, Cambridge. And the research center, let me look at this because you guys won't see a difference, but I will. Okay. Autism Research Center. Autism in itself is a very interesting, you certainly feel bad for people that experience very bad, the negative ramifications of that type of if you're on a particular spectrum and it gets to where it really hurts you, then I certainly do feel bad for that. But just as a clinical way to kind of conceptualize the brain and the societalization of the brain in terms of like a spectrum of how you view reality with autism. I don't know. Anyway, I don't want to answer that question yet because I want to get paid for that one. Anyway, Cambridge again got a good. Their power play needs help. Author 0 Degrees of Empathy. There's a lot of like, might be something going around in the zeitgeist around 2012 to 2017 or something about empathy and new stuff that has popped up around this. Maybe not. I don't know, but a lot of stuff about empathy and its negation. Anyway, Simon Baron-Cohen's last question is: Can we redesign our education system based on the principle of neurodiversity? Okay, well, I don't really know what the principle of neurodiversity is, so I'm just going to have to make some assumptions. I'm going to make the assumptions that the principle states at least something along the lines of our brains develop differently. There are somewhat different types of brains that develop differently and learn differently, and further, our education system is very cookie cutterish in that even if we sometimes segregate out, for example, the people that may be more advanced according to the structures and constraints and paradigm of the ideology of the current educational systems, even if we segregate out, advanced versus mediocre versus trouble, you're still, my guess is that you could say that like somebody in the, call it the lower achievement or something like that, it may just be that because our education system isn't diversified, we're not reaching them, not because they're not able to get it, because they learn differently and because their minds have just, their brains are orientated toward learning differently. Some of the best musicians in the world probably didn't do good in school, but it's because their brains were just different. Okay, so if it has something to do with that, well, then there's a bunch of questions that happen when you think about this. Is the goal of the education system only to train up our brains to be able to use them to their fullest extent, to get the most out of our gray matter? Is that the singular goal of the education system? I would argue that at least throughout most of history, it has been not. Probably, if not explicitly, at least implicit in an education system is also selling the stories of the culture that education system is a part of. And so it's kind of grasping a shared narrative for the people in that education system. And also at least tacitly enforcing a certain type of ideological paradigm for how we should think about things, how we should, not just our version of history, but our version of how to conceptualize, the historical narrative of where we're coming from. And, it goes into patriotism and goes into all this kind of stuff. Also, another thing is the education system isn't just about what's done in class. It historically has been what is done outside of class, what is done with socialization of people and the, all the things that's brought in with there. So it's so there's a lot of things to undress and then redress in a question like that. Let me just say, because I don't know exactly what the principle of neurodiversity is, even though I just defined it for myself. You wouldn't want, I don't think, a kind of infinite neurodiversity, because there are still places where we have to come together, and we have to come together, and the education system is probably as good a place as any of them to be able to come together. There are enough things that are pushing us apart that I can see a type of system where there are various components that are neurodiversified to a greater or lesser extent. And then there are other components, which are not nearly as diversified. So how about a diversification of the idea of neurodiversity and cultural diversity? Probably an approach like that might be better. I would say the question of can we redesign is probably easier than the question of should we redesign. I mean, that's a funny, because the can is a how question, the should is like a why question. So it's and then there's a whole other aspect to it too, because so kind of the inherent conflict in the question itself is like, can we redesign our educational system based on the principle of neurodiversity, but we're redesigning something, and by almost inherent first principles, when you're saying you're designing something, is you are building a structure on which things can flow through. So you're designing something where you're trying to promote minds and stuff that don't go through a specific structure. You know what I'm saying? So it's like you're almost fighting against yourself just to say redesigning it. It's almost like it's like markets aren't perfect, but it's almost like a market system better than a top down. We're going to design this, and it's like maybe you introduce some of the market forces into something like this, because otherwise you're going to design the creativity. You might just design the neurodiversity right out of it because you're designing it. It's only about 18% right. I mean, at the end of the day, we certainly want to get the most out of whatever everybody's that they've got. And if people learn a little bit of a different way, and we need to address that, of course we do, and of course we should. I just think it's that competition between. It's almost like you instill the competitive landscape of individuality versus collectivism in that framework of that system. That's what will give you maybe your proper mix of neurodiversity versus neurohomogeneity, or because you don't want a complete collective, and you don't want the complete Wild West neurodiversity or culturally or whatever. You want a balance there, but a balance is probably best achieved by a competitive balance. Then again, it's not all just about competition. Oh, Christ. These questions are too easy. The answer to that question is yes, but not if we divide. The answer to the question of can we redesign our education system based on the principle of neurodiversity is yes, but not if we design it. You know, if you just say things and then say they're opposite, you look really sophisticated. Okay. Lisa Feldman. I know a Feldman. I wonder if they're related. We're all related. They are related. University distinguished professor of psychology, Northeastern University research neuroscientist. She's a brainy one. Massachusetts. That's a weird name for anything, even a state. General Hospital. It's a fairly common. And lectured in psychiatry, Harvard Medical School. Author of How Emotions Are Made. Okay, and her question is, how does a single human brain architecture create many kinds of human minds? Well, I'm just going to harken back to my, I mean, you got hardware, we'll just conceptualize the mind for a moment as hardware, firmware, software, just for a moment, and you can already see right there that, and I'll completely erase everything I just said there. We'll just look at an operating system, which you could say is kind of like the architecture of a brain. And you could say that the software running on top of that operating system is, you could say that that's the minds that are running on top of the brains. We'll look at all the different types of software you can get on, many different operating systems. And so another way to think of it is, another way to think of it is maybe there's only like 20,000 genes in the human genome, 20, whatever it is. And there's obviously epigenetics, which rides on top of that and encodes for how the genes are to be read out, and which ones are to be read out, and which ones will be. But either way, the point is still the same. 20,000 genes, and so not many of them are even if half of them were dedicated to creating brain structures and stuff like that. It's like, okay, so it's 10,000 data points, but there's a near infinite variety in the mental landscape to go. So it's almost because our brains are so recent and they couldn't have been programmed, so to speak, at least are not programmed in the same way that our skeletal systems function and our basic, what are the two types of nervous system? The autonomous nervous system and the other nervous system, the one that we basically don't have control over. Where was I going with that? I kind of feel like once let's just abstract the shit out of this. Once a system, just call it system. Could be a person, could be a whatever, an agent. Well, agent already implies a bunch of things, but once an agent has the has the capability to self-model or self-reference. But I want to say self-model. It's like, okay, once an agent has the ability to like identify a me and then put a me in the context of the world, but do that in terms of being able to model something, it opens up an entire landscape waiting to be exploited. And because, well, yeah, that's true, but so what? Well, you know what? I'll turn it around. How dare you say that? A single human brain creates many kinds of human minds. We're only experiencing many kinds of human minds because we are in the midst of the human mind. So we look at this like, oh, everybody thinks differently. But if we were, some UFO alien species looking back on the Earth, you might think, oh, they all think the same because you just look at how we behave and stuff like that. And it's like there's no diversity there. It's we all think the same. It's like we think the rainbow is this amazing panoply of colors and stuff. But if you take a step back and you look at the entire electromagnetic spectrum, the rainbow's, I mean, it ain't shit. So if I wanted to get around, I'll be dead soon. If I wanted to get around answering the questions, I could say that you're presupposing that we're actually, you're coming from the perspective of being in the jungle, so you're seeing it as a jungle of varied, and stuff. But step outside of it, and it's not so big. But you know what? I'll take you seriously, and I'll take that idea seriously. It's because the part of the area where we're doing our wandering, I mean, the prefrontal, I won't get into all the specific brain parts because I don't know them, but just the latest evolved areas where we're doing our upper level conceptualizing and modeling and things like that. They're the least blueprinted, almost by definition, parts of us. And if you think about it, they kind of have to be the least blueprinted because they're the last things to get added on. They're the last parts of the structure. So they have the least rules applied to them. So, I mean, they don't, and if you think of it from kind of an evolutionary perspective as well, you think about like, okay, there's only so many ways that you can, eat food, process food, get the energy, eliminate the food, do the same thing the next day. I mean, that's baked in because it's been baked in for hundreds of millions of years. All of those rules have been baked in. You're not going to, you freelance on that stuff, you're dead. So, there's specific, I mean, it's built. There's homeostasis. There's all that kind of stuff. But these upper levels where we're just able to just wander around and think as a philosopher does and do all that kind of, this crazy stuff, you barely built warning signs, much less guardrails, much less whatever. So we're looking at the thing that is just recent, like the newest, coolest thing about our brains. And we're wondering, how can it be so new and cool and do all these different things? Well, it's just an accident of, it has to be that way because if it was more constrained, it wouldn't be the new and coolest thing. I don't know if that made any sense other than to me. It's the latest evolved thing. It's at the edge of our thing. It's at the edge of our evolution. So it's the least built, the least constrained. So that's the nature of it. I mean, if you ask the question about, how can the architecture of a human, arm result in, and then you look at all the other mammal arms and the way they look, you'd just be like, well, they kind of look the same. It has like the same function, and that's because the blueprint or the Blaupunkt or whatever a German word for that is, other than overpriced stereo, is it's set there. It's set there. Its function is defined because it's just, this is what it does, and if it doesn't do it right, we're done. I mean, we've got so much stuff up here that once all these basic things like how do you get your food and how do you do this are done, we can play here. But the reason we can play so much is that it's just the newest kid on the block. It hasn't been defined yet. It hasn't been. It's how our arms work in our digestive system. The Krebs cycle is prose. This is poetry. Because it isn't very governed yet. So the answer to how does a single brain architecture create many kinds of human minds is because the parts of those brains are written in poetry, not prose, certainly not law. Okay, next. Andrew Baron, neuroethologist, Department of Biological Sciences at Macquarie University. I'm pretty sure that doesn't exist, and this guy's just a fake. Macquarie? What is that? It's a gay Australia. Macquarie? I don't know what that is. Anyway, it's got a good picture. I like the it's like it wasn't taken professionally, but a professional could take notes from how that is constructed. Anyway, his last question. Again, this is Andrew Barron. What would a diagram that gave a complete understanding of imagination need to be? Oh, Christ. Just making sure everything is still working there. I have a penchant for screwing things up. What would a diagram that gave a complete understanding of imagination need to be? Well, need to be? You're a bastard for stating it that way. Because that is so inchoate or inchoate. Well, isn't imagination at some level just, it's almost the opposite of like deduction. It's almost the opposite of, here's a landscape, let me navigate the landscape to get to a certain, whatever it is, a point, an argument, a mathematical theorem or whatever. This is like, imagination is kind of like a creation of your own landscape, or a bridging of landscapes where no one else could see the bridging of the landscape. How are you going to diagram? How are you going to diagram the undiagrammable? Well, let's look at it from 50,000 foot or for 14 billion light years. I mean, can you step outside of the universe and imagine that everything that happens in the universe is somehow explicable in law, in theorem? I mean, like you could deterministic, and then if that's the case, then by definition, imagination would have to be too. That's a crock of shit. Maybe you're right, but it's still a crock of shit. I also think that diagram, it's like, I don't want to frickin' get into the, like, I don't want to get into word games. All there is word games. I mean, when I think of diagram, I think of something visual, like a visual aid. So it's like, what would a visual aid that explains every conceivable visual aid need to be? I think this guy is a bastard for asking this. This is like a frickin' Monty Python question of questions. I think this question, I'm going to just say this question doesn't make sense. Because what would a diagram of like imagination is maybe like, okay, I'm X, not X, not X, not X, not X. What's that? What? The diagram would be maybe a formula: X more or less equal X. I don't know. Imagination. Imagination is, let's think of it as the construction of nested virtual realities inside of the virtual reality that we're calling reality. So each of us has a virtual reality that we understand to be reality. What would a diagram that was the roadmap between what we're calling our reality and any other nested version that we're playing around with inside of what we're calling that reality? What would that need to, what are the letters and arrow signs and stuff? And yeah, this guy's just a bad person. I don't think there is. You know what? You know why there isn't? Because whatever you're going to call a diagram, if you call it a visual diagram, you're going to shortchange it, because imagination just isn't visual. You want anything that you call a diagram is going to limit you, because it's going to place constraints upon. You're trying to explain this idea, but you're constraining it into this set of ideas, conceptually, whatever. So it explodes in a puff of logic. So yeah, I'm going to say not question. Nice try. You almost got me there, Andrew Barron. Thomas A. Bass, or Thomas A. Bass. Thomas A. Bass? Oh, he might have liked that. Professor of English and Journalism, SUNY, State University of New York, another great hockey team. Albany, author of, oh, don't get me to try and pronounce that. The Eudaimonic, could just be Eudaimonic, could be EU Daemon IC, Daemon IC, Pi, and the spy who loved the U.S., or the spy who loved us. His last question is, another one of these. What libraries will we have to build when cloning becomes infinitely expandable? Okay. I have to take all of your, I have to accept the worldview that you've built for me in order to answer this. And I don't know if I want to, because I don't know if anything is going to be infinitely anything. I know that we say infinite, but what do we really, I mean, infinite though. I mean, huge has nothing to do with infinite. Infinite's a whole nother class, you know? Okay, you know what? I'll try and answer his bullshit question. What libraries will we have to build when cloning becomes infinitely? So what he's kind of saying, it's okay, so he's it's Claude Shannon. Information compression, okay, so if we expand it out, I'll just say we had not 8 billion human souls on this planet, but 800 trillion human souls scattered throughout the universe. And we were getting their, and we had access to all of their brains and their imaginations and their thoughts and their fears and the best stories they had, their experiences, every anything we could grab. What would it take to contain that? It depends who is the librarian. Because libraries are pretty much by definition libraries are not databases. If libraries are databases, it might come down to more like physics. But when you're talking about a library, you're talking about what is important information, not just just a document of things. You're talking about what are the important things that are worth remembering and worth picking up on. Does that scale upwards at the same time as human minds and human brains do? And we know that that's not true. I mean, kind of, if I'll oversimplify it for effect. What are the lies worth believing? That is a self-plug. Now, what are the stories worth preserving to get, that are important enough for someone to want to preserve because they contain useful information? And that depends upon who the librarian is. You know? What do we consider important to categorize and understand and about ants? You know? What's our library on ants look like? And Is it going to become infinitely expandable if there were a trillion times more ants? Of course not. Of course, by saying that, I've sidestepped his question. Cleverly, though, so we'll take it. I don't think the libraries will change that much. Assuming we become, if we remain, again, all these questions are like, if we were just less human, if we remain biologically reproducing, sexually reproducing, we live, we die, that cycle, the stories that we will tell each other, ourselves, and the things that we will deem important enough to be able to want to hold on to and to keep, somewhere at society's collective grasp, in a way, it's not going to expand infinitely, because it's going to be constrained by our biology, by the things necessary to propel us forward. So if it's a human librarian looking at humans, it's not going to expand infinitely, I guess. Information will be conserved. Information will be compressed. It will be the, the surface of the black hole, not the... I almost started talking about something I had absolutely no idea of. Anyway, so the answer to what libraries we have to build when cloning becomes infinitely expandable is, it depends on who the librarian is. If they're human like us, they won't change that much. Mary Catherine Bateson, Professor Emerita, George Mason University, visiting scholar, Sloan Center on Aging and Work, Boston College, author, Composing a Further Life. All these people have interesting book titles. I would hope the books are themselves interesting, but that's the poetry and the prose. The poetry is always prettier. Her last question is, will the process of discovery be completed in any of the natural sciences? I'll say that again. Will the process of discovery be completed in any of the natural sciences? Well, let's take an example of science. The natural sciences, okay. Let's take geology. I'll take that because it's non-biotic. We don't have to, it impacts biotic, it impacts biology and is impacted by biology. I mean, if you look at it on long enough scales and minute enough, we build the Hoover Dam, in 100 million years, will people be able to go look at the geographic column and see the changes from the Hoover Dam? Depends on if they give a shit, probably. Can I imagine geology, pretty much you're not going to discover anything new. Well, from just a physical landscape portion, could you just... I can imagine a time where you have just mapped out every geological feature, every geological structure of, let's just say, the Earth. Let's just, so I could see where it could be mapped. Even mapped, though, it's like, is there a quantum geology? Probably doesn't make any sense. Probably doesn't make any sense to try and combine those two fields. Watch, I just pissed off a whole subgenre on Reddit. Will the process of discovery be completed in any of the natural scientists? So let's go back to Claude Shannon. The hell am I doing? To say that it would makes an assumption that not only can we map it, but we can also exhaust every interpretation of a finite set. Are there infinite interpretations to a finite set of facts? Infinite being very, very different than huge. Yeah, blame it on that other guy's question. He's screwing me up for all these questions. Well, that's something to think about, though. You get in a framework of thinking a certain way, and then everything's that. Everything's Bill Clinton. Okay. Will the process of discovery be completed in any of the natural sciences? That goes back to what is a library? I mean, what are you calling discovery? You know, you discover that there was the Nile had another little sub river that we didn't know about, but was only there for 5 years, but it fed into the Nile, and it had a little bit of impact on the geological. If you look at it, like, is that still discovery? I mean, what scale are you going down to? It comes down to what you call discovery, you lousy. I think it's just. I don't think you'll ever be able to call it done, because to call it done by definition is something like, it's like calling something. It's like you never put a lid on anything for sure. But you probably get to the point, and we probably have gotten to the point in some sub areas of the natural sciences where anybody peek it in, just it's like we've mined it for useful stuff. And it isn't to say that nobody's going to find anything else useful in there, but people go in and in and in and in, and it's just like, okay, there's just and then it all gets shaked up because you make a more fundamental discovery, which literally changes the perception of your conceptualization of that thing in and of itself. It's like, oh, you don't look at geology as just a as the specific idea about the plate tectonics and how these things work themselves out on Earth. You think about geology as the generalized and specificated branching of time and matter through whatever manifolds that happen to be. And this is just that language. This is just that this is that dialect of it. So I don't think you can put a nail in you can just, put a fork in it. It's done in any of the natural sciences, because there could be something that comes more foundational that actually changes the way we look at the whole thing. But I think you probably get to the point where you're just not. There's a reason you're not making any new discoveries, and because there's not much useful. There's data there, but there's not much more information you can pull out of it. So I think from an absolute technical point, no, but from a philosophical perspective, no, but from a practical, pragmatic perspective, yeah. This is all just going to fall off, isn't it? Okay, next. Thank you. Good Christ. Mary Catherine Bateson. She was photographed in front of a shelf of books, that would make sense. Next on board, we've got Gregory Benford, the Emeritus Professor of Physics and Astronomy at UC, which most people don't understand this crazy terminology, but that's University of California Irvine. Novelist, The Berlin Project. Okay. And his last question is, what is the hard limit on human longevity? God, I hope we... Well. This, of course, comes down to definitions, too. What do you want to call a human? Are you going to call the part of us that's... Are you going to call this part of the river of life the human, where we have biological children that inherit half the DNA from the parent, half from one parent, half from the other, and then what is the hard limit on that? That strategy, that mechanism. I think that's a very different question than what is the hard limit on where we might be going if we don't extinguish ourselves. And I don't think we'll do that. But where we might be going. But if you're talking about this, the flesh and bones, as the scriptures tell us, what's the hard limit on that? Well, I mean, the second law of thermodynamics has got to come in there, but if we had custom telomere barbers, a little shout out to Brett Weinstein. If we had DNA repair mechanisms and all the physical repair mechanisms, and if we had a robot for every cell in our body somehow, or we were able to kind of just do that, so that we were just, they're slavishly, truly, only objective was just to keep up the functioning of this corpuscle, of this limbic system and all this. What would be the hard limit on that? Well, you could potentially say that it might bump all the way up against physics itself, maybe, because who are we? What is the relationship to me physically than the me of 20 years ago? Almost all the cells have been replaced. Almost all the physics of it is mostly different, but still there's something here that's been being created. So can you imagine our mortal coils just being regenerated ad infinitum? Here's what's going to happen. that is a process which we'll just get bored of. We will get so bored of our human bodies and our biological constraints that we'll just realize it's like why keep creating this body when it's already limiting us. We probably won't. We'll probably still be as constrained as we like our bondage. Anyway, I digress. I think it's I don't know that there necessarily is one. Obviously, the upper laws of our conceptualization of how physics works and how the fundamentals there are gonna impose a hard limit. But I think the functional or practical hard limit is that probably after a couple hundred years, we're just going to be like, there's nowhere else to go in the conceptual framework of being a human. I want to explore outside of what this means. So it may not be it may just be we've gone everywhere that we can go in this 84 Trans Am, and we want to try something new. And the 84 Trans Am isn't going to take us anymore. So, you could say that's where we get heaven too. Let's not try and diagram the imagination here. So the answer to what is the hard limit on human longevity, the hard limit is our being bored with the limitations of the human body and the corpse and whatever else. And this is limiting, this is constraining. Or 138 years. Next, Laura Betzig, anthropologist and historian. I actually like the fact that there's not much there in terms of a bio. I actually like that a little bit more. It's like, get rid of all the robes and stuff. Just give me your freaking question, You don't have to dress it up. Anyhow, she's probably a serial killer. Will we ever live together in a hive? What is she, she's come from this. See? All the other people I just took the question for the most part as well as I could based on what is the question. Here, maybe because there was so little given, I'm like, will we ever live together in a hive? I'm like, okay, I need more because I need more. It's like, oh, she's coming from this perspective or whatever. Doesn't matter. Will we ever live together in a hive? Will we ever know what it's like to be a bee? I think the answer to both of those questions are the same. Because they consist of how we conceptualize society. Even if from a 5,000 foot or from an alien perspective, you could look at the way an ant colony operates and a human city operates and be like, oh, it's the same freaking thing. It's the same principles. It's just on different levels of analysis. When you're inside it, it's all about the particular, what does that ketchup taste like to you? So, I can imagine us trying to create virtual structures which are more and more collective in nature, and where we kind of subjugate our individuality to, let's just say, swimming in a school of fish, as opposed to being the fish. We're part of the school. Huh. Well, all things are, if you can model something, doesn't that mean it exists? So if we can conceive of something, it's got an existence somewhere. Um, we got low, the other, and high. Makes me think of the dissociative aspects of losing, letting go of the inherent grasp of our individuality is potentially dangerous, potentially exhilarating. It's like something else. Take the wheel for a while. I think, like so many other questions, this comes down to our biology and how much of how we think about things is tied into our biology, which is why, hey, you know what? I kind of don't blame some people on the progressive side that are like, I blame them a little bit because when they want to like deny science and stuff, but it's like, if you want to get somewhere and science isn't telling you a good story on getting there, or it's kind of saying, well, you need to be aware of this and this and this because this is what's pulling you from getting to where you want to go. Why don't you just ignore the fact that? Why don't you just ignore that? Just like shut the fuck up, science. You know what you're talking about. This is where we want to. This is where we need to go. We're just gonna, you're antiquated. So I don't know how we got in this tangent, but. And there's a way that I can see the strategy and see the tactics of somebody that's just like, okay, I know this is where we want to go. So if our history constrains us, let's free ourselves of the constraints. And part of science is history. Part of history is science. I don't even. Words are not a good way to chop up reality. All right. Oh, yeah. Now I'm getting that disassociated, and then we're talking about Susan Blackmore, who I haven't read I read a little bit of her stuff. Something, the memes, something. Very interesting thinker. So I'm fully not prepared to encounter this question. Let me just make sure this is still working. Shooting? How come it looks like crap? Are you freaking kidding me? Okay, whatever. It's just the words. It's just a visual. It's just words and then audio and then video. So really nothing important when you're going to put something for other people to communicate to other people. You don't really need any of that stuff. Okay. Well, okay, that's working. Stop. Start. Okay, this is working. It does seem to be working, and I'm still recording. This has been. I'm firing my technical crew. Okay, we already dealt with that. We're going to the next one. This next one will be an easy one. I'm sure it will because it's Susan Blackmore. Oh, so the answer to Laura Betzig of Will We Ever Live Together in a Hive is only through the right cocktail of drugs. Okay. Susan Blackmore, psychologist, visiting professor, University of Plymouth. Used to make a fine motor car. Author, Consciousness and Introduction. Wow. That book, that you know what? That book is the feminine to Pinker's How the Mind Works. They need to get together and have a kid. Anyway, I'll be back in a second. I need to just walk around for a moment. I'm back. Or not. Where's the back to which we are finding ourselves? Where would I be without my Mountain Dew? Testing, 1, 2, 3. Make sure this shit's still working. Is there still a? Okay, I'm shooting. You know what? I should turn off my. Like that's the. That's gonna make the difference. Turn off that bathroom light. That's gonna save the world. Everything's fixed now. Back at it. Susan Blackmore, psychologist, visiting professor, University of Plymouth, author of Consciousness and Introduction. Her last question is, what kinds of minds could solve, could solve the mind-body problem? Well, that's easy. Well, on one level, it is easy. It's a brain that can abstract itself so that it doesn't see the mind-body problem as a problem. So, but that's just kind of definitionally. What would be the positive features that you would have to give to a class of minds that could solve the mind-body problem? Well, on one aspect, it would be a disassociated mind. Well, it would have to be disassociated at least from the. It's like, okay, if you're like the anti-culture, you're looking in on the culture because that's not you. It's not how you identify, but you identify. You can critique the culture, so you can say like the subculture maybe in some ways is a critique of the culture, because you can stand back because you're not a part of it. So any kind of mind that could stand back and critique the mind-body problem, much less or solve it. I don't know. Well, let's not get into semantics here. I'd have to be able to step back. So they couldn't be, so pretty much by definition, they couldn't be constrained by the very thing that they're trying to describe. Otherwise, you're going to get frickin' Schrodinger's cat and all that shit. So can you more positively describe that species of concept, framework, originating agent? What does it look like? You're looking at it. Me, I figured it out. That it's exactly my kind of mind. Could solve the mind-body problem. Because I've figured it out. So that's true by definition. Is there anywhere else I can go to think about that? I don't know if there is. Yeah, so it can't be constrained to the framework of thinking the way that we're constrained. So, oh, wow, well, you start getting a little bit deeper. You think about it, it's like, see, this is why I wish I knew more about the field of AI and where it's going. Because I was just thinking, like, is AI going to rediscover the mind-body problem when they're trying to program or trying to figure out these AI systems, or could it just be? It's gonna crop up. It's gonna crop up in AI if it hasn't already. It is. It isn't a problem. It's a perspective. The mind-body problem isn't a problem. It's just a perspective. It's just formulated as a problem. But all it is just it's just a different viewpoint on a landscape. So it's the kind of minds that could decouple themselves from looking at so the kind of mind that could solve the mind-body problem is the kind of mind that conceptualizes it in a way that doesn't see it as a problem, but just sees it as this is my landscape. This is where it is from where I'm looking, and that's where it is from where you're looking, and it's just perspective. What kinds of minds can solve the mind? I don't know. Yeah. Like I say anything else, I'm just rehashing my initial ignorance. Another winner. So the answer is 12. Alan S. Blinder, Gordon S. Rentschler, Memorial Professor of Economics and Public Affairs, Princeton University, author of Advice and Dissent. Why do I think this is going to be more grounded in the actual thing of existent? He's also very there. He's there. Will AI make the Luddites mostly right? Oh, this is exactly the question I would expect to see from a guy in a suit with a very geometric pattern behind him. This is like you are fulfilling your role to ask this question, which isn't a bad question. It needs to be asked. I'm just saying he's just fitting the role. He's like cast perfectly. Casting agent. Wardrobe. Will AI make... Okay, so will AI make what I'm saying... He's Luddites, Luddites. I always just called him Charles. But anyway. So... Yeah. Another way of saying that is our increasing embrace in technology, and especially AI, which may be a flavor of that, but we'll take his question at its face value. It's like, oh, will AI make us regret ever being on the network, so to speak? He's not saying mostly right. Well, it's a matter of perspective. From the perspective of the AI, from the perspective of the Luddite, from the perspective of who? You know, everybody wins according to, you know, how you conceptualize the rules. But from a more pragmatic, down-to-earth level, you know, I mean, if you think about a virus as not just a just because we have that on our mind right now because of the whole corona and all that kind of stuff. If you think about a virus as not just something that can infect your biology, your this, but of course, in some way that is less than perfectly analogous, but has something to do with an analogy there. You think about terms of memetics, the ideas behind memetics, things like that, like mind viruses, mind, whatever it is. There's whatever's going on here that has its analogs in biology. Totally lost where I was going with that. Oh, okay. No, I'm back a little bit. Shit. Who the fuck knows? I mean, how would you even measure that? You know? I mean, not to get too dystopian or utopian. It's all a matter of perspective. But it's like, even if you took a 50,000 foot view of like the world and you just saw, like, here's humanity, here's Homo sapiens, circa 2020. That's a arbitrary distinction anyway, but we'll just call it 2020. AD. Oh, nothing's arbitrary. Totally lost my train of thought. Oh, if you could just see, so then all of a sudden we just disappear. Like, okay, so here's, you see the advent of like AI, and here you see humanity. And if you looked at it from whatever perspective of some alien civilization who's just like looking at it from like a, let's say they came upon this thing, you know, a million years afterwards or whatever, and they're just looking at it as a historian. It depends on what type of historian they were, or what they were more interested in, because maybe humanity as defined biologically just goes away. But what if it gives birth to ideas that are running through the universe, and, you know, that's a matter of perspective, Mr. Alan S. Blinder. And the word blinder too, it's you know, it's actually comforting that he's, you know, that you know, he's just got a very physical, like, boom, he's there, and he's asking a question that's kind of like wants to constrain us or pull us back from, like, you know, where the hell are we going with this AI stuff? And it's a legitimate question, because I feel like a big part of this is, or like, we're recreating the beast. We are recreating our own dragons to slay and to save. And then we're putting all of that potentially into all the systems that are supposed to save us. So from that perspective, it still just is a matter of perspective. Okay, you could look at it too as just like the Luddites, just they were right by instinct. They were just wrong in where they cut things off. Or you could just say the Amish or the whatever. It's just like they knew there was some place to cut it off where, you know, it's just like there's some place that you have to get out of the stream before you can't the waterfall is going to take you. Well, my fear is that, and I don't mean to be overly dystopian, but my fear is that if AI does make the Luddites mostly right, there will be little consolation because they will take the Luddites, you know, it will be little consolation for the Luddites to be right because they'll be taken away in the storm just like everything else. Wow, that's dark. Let's go to. Let's be more happy. Let's be more happy. Let's go to Paul Bloom, who is and look at this. It's a blue, pastels in the color, good lighting. I'm very much into the portraits right now. I don't know why. The Brooks and Suzanne Reagan, professor of psychology and cognitive science at Yale University, another incredibly good hockey team. Actually, they might have a good hockey team. I think they do. Damn it. Author Against Empathy. Ooh, Against Empathy. Seems to be a theme of empathy or there's something either swirling around in the cognitive landscape, in the culturally elite circles of what to think about the idea of empathy that's swirling around or something. I don't know. In early 21st century thought. Anyway, I'll try that again, just out of, let's give the guy his due here. Paul Bloom, the Brooks and Suzanne Reagan Professor of Psychology and Cognitive Science, Yale University, author of Against Empathy, which is a very interesting, I'll say it again, very interesting title. His last question is, why are we so often kind to strangers when nobody else is watching and we have nothing to gain? He should have been asking this question to our psychology when it was born in the midst of time about, 500,000 years ago. He should have been whispering this to our Cro-Magnon, whatever, Neanderthal, blah, blah, blah. Because the question now is fairly, I feel like this is, well, let's just talk about it. I think there's an implicit problem in the phrasing of the question. It's assuming something that isn't true. Well, let's try this. Why are we so often kind to strangers when nobody is watching and we have nothing to gain? Well, okay, let's take, I'm walking through a forest, nobody is around me, there is a kitten in a tree. I view the kitten as in danger if I don't take some type of effort to help it. The effort may be absolutely minimal on my part. The benefit to this would be seen by no one, and therefore, if I did get the kitten from the tree, no one's going to see this, and so it doesn't benefit me. Well, that's wrong, because there is never, if you have a functioning cerebral cortex and cerebellum and all the other whatever up is in the noodle in here, if If the operating system is linked up to the firmware and the firmware is linked up to the software the way humanity is, there's somebody is always watching. So if I save the kitten from the tree, I'm watching myself save the kitten from the tree. And because I have to fit into a society, I have to fit into into this school of fish, but it's also a school of fish that needs to get the food. So, and it's gonna, the benefit to it being in a school of fish has to outweigh the things that detract it from being a school. It has to be greater than the benefits. The benefits accrued to being in the school of fish, because that's where we're with our analogy, of course, has to be greater than the disadvantages or the demerits or the things that it takes away. So, because I have to situate myself, because of that, then there has to be some inherent advantage, I guess, in being a part of this society, culture. I've got to situate myself in that context, in that framework. And so that means I have to communicate that, because we are communicative social beings. We have to communicate our relative sense of we are going to play by the rules to the rest of our environment, which is the other people around it. So we have to say we're going to be good people, and we're going to obey by these laws. We have to communicate that to people. And because of the ability to have mental representations of ourselves, our physical communication is only a tiny percent of our total ability to communicate, or our actual physical communication is a tiny subset. So we have to communicate things mentally. I'm making this way harder than it has to be. We are always watching ourselves. So the idea that nobody is watching is basically never true. We have to communicate to other members of our society that we are good and upstanding members of our society. The easiest way that evolution has figured out to communicate is just to not lie and to actually be a good and upstanding member of society. So he could actually be trying to say, why are so few of us sociopaths? Which is an interesting. If you phrase it that way, at least I would be more interested in it, because it seems like it would be more honest. Because it's almost like if you can divorce what you're going to communicate to society, you can completely just divorce the image that you're going to portray to society from, totally decouple it to your behavior, or how society would view your behavior if it weren't so decoupled. If you can mentally decouple that, that's like the sociopathic hack, right? Or that's the hack, is just that decoupling from. It's almost like your own, yeah. So if the question was asked, Why haven't more people figured out how to hack the question that isn't, that would be an interesting question, because we're always watching, we're always communicating to other people, but the people that have actually decoupled that, the question could be, why hasn't everybody gotten that hack? Thank God they haven't. Or we'd be well, maybe that's part of it. Maybe because if everybody did get that hack, then society would break down. So it may just be that the percentage, oh man, I don't know if I like where any of this stuff has taken me. Maybe just be the percentage of like sociopathy or whatever we would call that is just like inherent in the system. It's a way to like yeah. I mean, yeah. In one way, you just look at it like we'll try and look at it as like, it's the exception that proves the rule. It's the, all right, maybe I'm making this question too. I'm making this too much out of this question, I think, because he wasn't asking. He wasn't asking what I'm asking, or at least this question isn't stated. He's just saying, why are we so often kind to strangers when nobody's watching? That's not true. And we have nothing to gain. That's not true. We have our own status in society that is communicated by mostly being faithful, and there being a coupling of how society would model us and how we would model us. All these things are like hacks, and I feel like these are all just manifestations of these more fundamental principles, and they are intellectually tribal to us. They're playing themselves out in humanity, but these are fundamental principles that would work out through any evolutionary system that has constraints that are well, you just have to talk about initial conditions. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. We're social creatures. We want to communicate that we're good social creatures. The easiest way to do that is to not lie to ourselves, so we don't have to lie to anybody else. That's the short answer to that. Why haven't we all? And the question is, make it a more interesting question. Why haven't we all hacked that system? Is because if we would hack the system, if enough of us hack the system, then the system becomes unstable. So I think you'd have to say it's an anti-fragile system, because you're not going to destabilize it that way. It won't let itself destabilize that way, I guess. It's a conceptual, it's framework of society that perpetuates itself. And the noise that you get actually kind of pushes it back into line. It's the thing that gives society its structure and shape. And too much noise is just going to outline it more perfectly. Okay, so the answer to why are we so often kind to strangers when no one is watching and we have nothing to gain is yellow number 5. Okay. Giulio. He's already seduced me. I don't even care what I don't care what it is. He's already seduced me. Bocalete. Have your way. Chief Strategy Officer at the Nature Conservancy. Even there's just a poetry even in the title. He is that's the most Italian sounding, completely American English, whatever it is. How much biodiversity do we need? 12. Oh Christ, that what the hell do you mean by need? First, I mean, like, need? Isn't it that we would want it? Isn't that it's just even discounting for a moment, anyway, discounting even the idea of that other creatures could experience pain or anything like that. Even getting rid of that, if you just take everything as like, as like colors, or pastels or whatever you could put on this landscape, wouldn't you want to be able to create with all the colors? Why would you want to limit yourself? So from a very, very poetry perspective, well, poetry isn't about need anyway. It's about want. It's about, the creation of something. But if he's coming down to the more pragmatic question of how do we square human needs, physical needs with the what nature, unimpeded by the machinations of humanity, would look like. Well, that's no fun, because then you have to start talking about constraints and chaos and you gotta get away from the poetry of it, You start, because let's say, okay, you can't have infinite biodiversity because that doesn't mean anything. It's like saying you got infinite whatever. It's doesn't mean anything. And zero biodiversity would be, now, see, he is a sexy beast. That would be just me, right? Or You can't have infinite, you can't have zero, or you would have nothing alive to ask the question. How much do we need? So it all comes down to that word need. What the hell does need mean? That is the question. That is the question. It's the definition of that word. I want as much as I can, and I want all of nature to flower and to benefit and to be able to enjoy the fullest potentiality of its, as long as it doesn't screw with what I want in the slightest. You know, that's well, even from a purely pragmatic perspective, if you just think about biodiversity as basically as, among other things, the library that we could search in the pursuit of evolutionary strategies. So, to the extent that biodiversity may catalog various evolutionary technologies and strategies and hacks and this and that and stuff, and of course more tactile things like maybe cures for disease or, you know, all that kind of stuff. We cut ourselves off if we limit our ability to study and comprehend that as a just branch of knowing. So if you think about biodiversity as a branch of knowing, we figured everything out. We don't need we don't need to know anymore. No, we've not. So if you just conceptualize it as a branch of, you know, information to be gleaned, strategies to be found, then you want to encourage that as much as possible, because as clever as we can be, evolution has probably gotten there first. So why don't we just, you know, why reinvent the wheel? Evolution got there first. Let's go find it and repurpose it to fix the wagon and get us to California. Okay, anyway. Ian Bagost. Did I actually answer? Yeah, I said 12, right? Yeah. That was the answer. Ivan Bagost, whatever. Ivan Allen, not Ethan Allen of the furniture fame, but Ivan Allen of the Ivan Allen fame. College Distinguished Chair in Media Studies and Professor of Interactive Computing, Georgia Institute of Technology, founding partner Persuasive. Too many, it's too much to keep track of. Contributing editor, The Atlantic. The Atlantic. What do I think about The Atlantic? You know what? Because I don't have one particular view of The Atlantic, I will say that it is at least the magazine I'm talking about now. I don't have a particular absolute view of it. That in and of itself makes it interesting to me. So, you know, I can't conceptually pigeonhole it perfectly. So I guess they at least are doing at least a head fake, or the idea of a variety of political viewpoints, at least, even if they're still, you know, surface level. But anyway. Ivan Bagost last question is there a way for humans to directly experience what it's like to be another entity? I feel like I've already answered this question. And this is weird because now I don't know. Am I just in a new parallel reality here? I feel like I answered a question. You know what? And maybe that there's 278 responses, but there's only 9 distinct questions. I'm sure that's not the case. I just feel like I've answered this, but is there a way for humans to directly experience what it's like to be another entity? Without becoming that entity, no. Because in order to become, it's coming from either direction. If I wanted to directly experience what it's like to be a housefly, you have to put me inside of not just the body of a housefly, but the conceptual framework and information processing capabilities and infrastructure of a housefly. So everything about even the idea of what memory meant would be different. The tactile, everything would be so different that there could by definition be no conduit to be coming back to a human. And so so from that perspective, I just want to say no. But that's it's very dystopian. It's not because so I'm going to fight for a little bit more because that, taken to its logical extreme, you could say, is there no real communication between human beings? Is there no, because why is the dividing line? I made it arbitrary to make it at the species level, and maybe that's why he's saying to experience it's like to be another entity. So he's kind of assuming, in the assumption buried in the question is that humans are a type of entity, and that to differentiate that from another type of entity. So he's already disproven it in the question, I feel like, but I don't like that. So I don't like it, so it's not going to be that way. Well, how do we get there's different ways you could come at this from. One way that I'm kind of coming at it from almost like building up a commonality amongst us rather than segregating it. It's like, what is the common poetry that resides in us all? And does that common poetry, is there some strain of that we could even recognize in the housefly, and it's buzzing, doing whatever it's could we grasp the poetry there somehow? Because we can't directly map it. No, it's untrue by definition. But can we find the poetry? That's the essential question. I can't ever know exactly what it is like to be anyone else but me. But, the essential, without the poetry of common experience, or the idea that there can be common experience, what's it for in the first place? So it's a built-in, it's a conundrum. It's a connoible. If you're talking about from one level of just like, no, because you can't, it's like alternate realities, and you can't, if you went into the mind of a housefly and then came back, you wouldn't be able to conceptualize what it was like being in the mind of a housefly, because so you can't, from that perspective. No, can we search for, can we discover more, can we integrate the poetry that combines us all? It's just flipping the question around. We can't, the more perfectly we would simulate something, we would become that thing. So it would make trying to simulate it, it would defeat itself. But if you just don't view it that way, if you look at it not like trying to simulate something, but build the poetry out of, build the common poetry out of what undergirds everything. That might be a more fruitful way to think about it. Wow, my brain is, bam, is mush. So yes, the answer to I'm gonna try one more, and then I at least gotta take a break. Oh man. Okay, so the answer to, is there a way for humans to directly experience like to be another entity? No. Don't look at it that way. Look at building up the poetry of the universe that can reside in us all. Just don't try and make me put that on a blackboard. Okay, last one for the moment here. This is Joshua Bongard. Very, since the theme is looking at photographs, just looks like he's in front of a wall or something. Nothing too assuming, but That is late afternoon light, or a very good manipulation of the light to make it look like it's late afternoon light. Anyway, Joshua Bongard, Cyril G. Benoit, green and gold professor. Department of Computer Science, University of... Oh, this is where punctuation comes in. University of Vermont author. He authored the University of Vermont? Holy shit. This dude... Why haven't I heard of this guy? Oh, no. He's the author. He's the author, How the Body Shapes the Way We Think. Well, there you go. And then that's... We're in that landscape, aren't we? Already. We may be tiring. Our eyes might be tired, but at least conceptualized. Will the machine... Oh, this is the same damn question. This is the same question. Will a machine ever be able to feel what an organism feels? Could a machine ask that question? Can you imagine your fax machine just being like, I want to feel? Doesn't make any damn sense, but I think there are probably two ways that in order to maybe necessary but not sufficient conditions for something like a machine to be able to feel something like what an organism would feel like. And one, it has to be a physical thing. Right? Probably an organism, even as loosely construed as we want to play around with that word or that concept, has to feel in itself in a place, in a physical place, in something. So it has to have the parameters of physicality, and it has to conceptualize itself in physicality. Furthermore, probably, if you're talking about an organism that, if you want to relate a machine to an organism like we would do for, you'd have to give it, okay, so this physicality that I feel is one, extant in a physical space, two, is organized in some respects to continue doing that, to third thing, which is some type of goal. So you'd have to have a machine that can simulate itself as a, well, no, because you're asking what the hell an organism feels. What the hell does an organism feel? What the hell does an organism feel? That's the question. I mean, it seems so self-evident, but But that's because it's self-evident as it's instantiated in our particular version of humanity circa 2020. Like of course this is how an organism feels, but that's just because, you know. Yeah. What are the necessary what are the minimalist things that an organism could feel? What are the limiting, the smallest set of define organism? That probably is much more difficult than we think it is. And the answer to the question is built into our definition of organism. What does it feel like? What does this feel like? How do you... What are the simplest terms that you can use? How do you break down feels? There's part of me that wants to say that no, machines will not be able to feel like what organisms feel like, but they would be so insulted that they would use their vast, capacities to even take time simulating what an organism would feel like. They've got so much better stuff to do with than feel. Come on. I got no time for that. That's scary. All right. I got to take a break. My powers of lucidity have long since left me. And my power to control my own tongue. Anyway, I'll be back